Welcome to the next segment for the Sage Intacct Construction Inventory Configuration and Workflow. This segment will go specifically into the first workflow process that we discussed in the overview, which is issuing purchase orders and receiving those items into stock and inventory. And we're going to be doing that through the purchasing module. So let's go ahead and we'll go into our Intacct instance. And in this scenario, because it's entity specific, I do want to be in my entity level. So I'm going to be in Timberline General Construction. And I'm going to go and actually go into purchasing. And I'm going to start my first step in my workflow transaction that we set up in the prior sessions. So I'm going to go ahead and enter in a purchase order for stock. So of course, there's multiple ways to do this. You can have a shortcut on your dashboard. You can have favorites and get to it right from over here. You can also hit it from the list or from the plus button. So we're just going to create a new purchase order. So I'm going to come right into here and I'm going to hit the plus button. And it'll pop right into the purchase orders for stocks entry screen. And it'll show you the required information. So what's the date of the purchase order? Who's the vendor? So I can just start typing in the vendor name. So in this case, it's Buffalo Building Company. And all the information is going to pre-fill in from the vendor record. And if you remember in the transaction definition configuration, I checked off those buttons to allow editing to the pay, the return, and the deliver to. So now I can make sure that it's being delivered to the correct space. So I can say my deliver to, this is my warehouse address, or maybe you have some different contact lists set up for each of your warehouse locations. So you can actually say show more and go find your warehouse address. But in this case, it pre-filled correctly with our default address, which is our Timberline Construction Group's main location. So it is set up correctly. Then in the vendor setups, you have payment terms, date due, different information that you might want to include on this purchase order, including the ability to attach files. So if you have a particular, maybe a PDF doc showing the price quotes that you got from the vendor, you can certainly drag this right over top here, or you can add and browse to wherever you have it saved. But most people will simply just click and drag it over top of the attachment there. And based on the definition configuration we just went through, these fields may or may not be available. And this is where you can come into here and fill out some different dates. Need by date, promised by date. And then with Smart Rules, you can actually establish these as required fields. So if you set up a smart rule that says need by date or promised by date cannot be blank, when that user goes to post, it's going to give them a warning or an error message that will say, hey, this field needs to be filled out. So you can kind of go through and figure out which fields you want to make required on each PO, and then go ahead and create some smart rules for that. So once you get down to the detail, the key here is making sure you have the columns set up and available that you want or need to be able to enter to during your PO creation. Now, all the columns will always be available. What I mean by that is if I click on the first line of the entry screen, you're going to see a button here called Show Details. If I click that, it's going to show me not only the columns that are already on there, but any other fields that I could enter or write to for that one particular line. So what you want to do is if you're having to click on this button every time to add to a certain field, you want to make sure that field is available on the main view here. And how you do that, and you need security to do this, but if you go over to More Actions, you'll see an Edit Entries layout. And if you click on that there, you're going to have the ability to see all the fields that you can add. So what you can do here is you can add fields that aren't on the view, you can take fields off that you don't need, and you can reorder them. Now, what we usually recommend is check this little box here before you make any changes. This will make the changes to all the views within this screen. If you don't check it, it's only going to be in the view that you're in, which in this case is create. So, it's not going to change the views for all three. So you want to keep those consistent, make sure you apply it. And then I want to look through and say, what do I need here? I'm going to take off this cross-reference field. I want warehouse. Because I'm ordering for stock for this transaction definition, I don't even want to put the project cost code and cost type on it. That's going to be reserved for POs that I enter directly for projects. Now, if you're doing both in the same view, you want to make sure you leave it on there. But in this scenario, we're not. We're ordering for a warehouse. I specifically want that information. I have a memo field here. Maybe you want to put notes. I'm going to put that before the warehouse selection so you can just drag it around. And I want quantity, unit price, extended price. And I just want to show location, make sure I'm in the right company, that type of thing. So is there anything else that I might want to include there on that line? Maybe department, maybe some ship date information, need by date would be a nice little function here, so you can pull that in. So once you get the screen the way you want it, you click Save Layout. And now, when we go back down, now we have an entry screen that's in the order that we want to flow the data through. So at this point, I'm going to come into here and pick the item I need from my item list. I can just start typing in a description, just like before. It's going to best fit that. You can also pull the list up and see the list, but most people will just come into here and say that widget that we set up in the item section. You know, you might want to have a little note description on that PO. You can do that if you want. What warehouse are we ordering it for? So this is pre-filling based on the entity that we're in, but we can say, yeah, we're going to order it for this warehouse. Now we're going to order it for the other warehouse. So we're going to order it for the GC warehouse. It is inventory. We're going to want to track it by quantity, but you do have the ability to create a PO just by amount, not by quantity. But in this scenario, we want quantity. Let's say we're going to order 100 each, and the price we got quoted was $50 a unit. So the PO is going to be for 5,000, and we need it by the 15th. Okay. So you can keep going. If you have multiple items, you just keep entering multiple items. If you have a lot of items and you want to default anything in there, you can hit the show defaults and fill out defaults. But at that point, I have two options. I can either hit post or I can hit draft. So if I'm in creating my PO and I'm halfway through and I want to go take a lunch or whatever, you can click draft and just save it there as a draft. It's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to post any of those transactions that we set up in the transaction definitions until we click post. Now, when you click post, that can trigger a couple of things. Number one, it can trigger the posting of that transaction into the system. It can also trigger an approval process. So if you have approvals turned on in your configuration, so in purchasing and setup configurations, I would want to turn on approvals for my POs. Then instead of it saying pending there, it'll say we're waiting approval. And the person in charge of going through that approval will get an email notification and a place where they can go in and approve that. In this scenario, we do not have approvals turned on. That is a purchase order. That purchase order has a state of pending. And what that means is it hasn't been converted yet. So it hasn't been received in this scenario. It's waiting a receipt, and that's why it's pending. And you'll notice that here, as you can see, some others have been partially converted. And why aren't we seeing the ones that have been converted? Because you can have views. And if you notice here on the left side, I have a view turned on called POs not received. And this might be handy for the next step, but you might also just have a view called all. And this view over here shows me all my purchase orders that have been created for this entity to date. So you can create your own views. You can filter by the views and you can sort by the views. Or by the columns, I'm sorry. So you can do it that way as well. So you can always click on these to sort. So now that PO is in there, I can choose to print or email it out. So let's say I want to email that PO out. I can choose email. And if I choose email, it's going to come up and say, who's this to? And that's all going to pull from the vendor setup. And you can also select a particular email template that you can create ahead of time and use to have verbiage built in it. Hey, here's your PO for this. Please click this link and sign it, or whatnot. So you can build a list of email templates and who it came from. Okay. So in this scenario, I'm actually going to say print so we can get a preview of it. And this is based on the transaction definition printed document template that's linked to it. So, and my demo data has it wrong. It's not an invoice, it's a PO. So these are the kind of things that you want to test to make sure your form's correct and things like that. But it will create a purchase order form for you at that time. So that PO is in the system. And so now the next phase in that workflow might be to when the inventory comes in via delivery, you might have a particular warehouse manager, someone who's responsible for receiving that PO. They can have their own dashboard. They can come in to the purchase order section here and receive it right from the purchase order section. What usually happens is what I just showed you prior is you might have a view created called POs not received, and that receiver will probably go into that view by default. So what happens is when you set up these views, you can save as to create a new view. You can edit the view. So I'm in POs, I can hit edit. And there's basically a wizard where you can check off the fields that you want to see, what fields you want to see on this view. And you just go through the wizard, next, next, next. I'm going to skip to a filter here where we said, just show us any PO that is not fully converted. We only want to see open POs. And the last phase, the last step here, save advanced options, we want to deploy it. And when you deploy it, what happens is now it becomes available for dashboards, that view. And if you go into that module, for example, under purchasing, if you go take a look at the all section, you'll see a custom views section right here. And there's all the views that I've created all throughout purchasing. So if I'm that receiver, I can favorite that view, POs not received. I can certainly click on it right from here. But if I go up to my favorites, it's right where I want it to be, right here, POs not received. So when I'm doing my receiving, I can just click right here. It takes me right to that screen, and now I can see the POs that I need to get to. So the one that came in today, for example, is for PO 70. It's from Buffalo Building. So now I can come into here and I can say, all right, well, let's convert or receive that PO. So this is that next step in that transaction definition where I can say convert and convert it into a PO receiver. And now it takes me into that screen, takes all the data from the PO, shows you right here it converted it from a stock PO. And if I go down, it pre-fills all the items. If I received them all, no problem. Review them. Quantity looks good. Again, just like in the prior step, you want to make sure you go into Edit Entries Layout and have any fields on there that you want to enter through. Okay, so you can kind of look through that here and create your fields. I'm just going to say cancel. And everything looks good. It's going into that warehouse. We got 100. At that point, post. If you got a partial, you can type in 50 and it'll leave it partially converted in that scenario. So let's say we only received 50 items. The rest are coming later in the week. I'm going to go ahead and say I received 50. That's going to trigger that journal entry to general ledger into inventory. So if I go take a look at this view here, I'm going to go take a look at this view for that receipt. And you can see I have a posting detail, which shows me the entry. So you can see here, based on our transaction definition we set up in the prior session, it's going to post into inventory and into inventory payable. And we can follow that general ledger journal number all the way back to right here, which actually shows you the actual journal entry number in detail. Okay, so you can follow that back. You can also see a history of how it was converted. You're going to have all that abilities in there. So at that point, that's in there waiting a vendor bill that comes in the door at some point. So just like the POs not received view, I created a view here called unbilled receipts. So these only show me receiving tickets that haven't been invoiced yet by the vendor. So again, if I'm someone who's entering in the accounts payable bills, I might want to come into this view and then come back in. All right, we got an invoice from Buffalo Building. And then here's where you can see, if you remember, we can inherit the number from the prior versus our own number. So some people do on the receiving side like to inherit the PO because it's a little easier to see. But that goes back to your view. You can have another column on here that says, hey, this was converted from PO 70. So I can still see what PO number it's related to right here. So that user can say, yeah, the AP vendor bill has purchase order 70 on it. This must be the transaction. So at this point, now let's say we assume we do get our AP bill from the vendor. So I'm going to go ahead and convert that receipt into a stock invoice. Now that takes me into my vendor stock invoice entry, just like before. It is going to now require a vendor invoice number, 12345. And this is what they're invoicing us for. We're going to leave it all good to go. I'm going to go ahead and hit post. And now that's going to create a general ledger transaction. And it looks like I already have a vendor number in there for that. So let's see what we got here. Try something else. Yep, there we go. So it was not a unique vendor number. So now that's posted as a vendor invoice. And if we go look at our GL transaction again, posting details, we can see that it actually took it out of inventory payable and put it into accounts payable, and also made that entry to get it out of that purchasing journal book, that additional journal that we did here on there as well. And if we go into accounts payable and we take a look at AP bills, there's the invoice right in accounts payable bill that I can pay for it. And if we go take a look at our inventory now for that item, that widget item, we can see now we have a quantity on hand of 151 because we added the 50 from the prior, and then there's 50 still on order. Well, we have one on order for something else, so we can track that process. So that's going to complete the workflow process for the purchasing, issuing PO, and receiving into stock. And in the next session, we'll jump into doing some workflows directly through inventory. And we'll see you soon. Thank you.